He found me shattered and promised I'd never break again. But then, he became the reason I forgot how to breathe without pain. I was sitting on a rusted bench outside the old clinic when he first saw me. Rain clung to my skin like grief clings to memory, and my eyes were swollen from crying for too long. I remember holding a paper bag filled with shattered prescriptions and broken hopes, pills I didn't want to take anymore, doctors I no longer trusted, and a mind I was terrified of calling my own. I was 23 and barely alive. My life was a graveyard of things I had loved and lost. My mother, gone. My father, a shadow. And love? Love was the sharpest knife I had ever bled from. And then he appeared. His name was Archer. And he looked like every broken piece of me had finally found its glue. He didn't walk up to me with grand words or perfect timing. He simply sat beside me in the rain. Quietly. Gently. Like someone who already knew what it meant to hurt in silence. He didn't ask me what was wrong. Instead, he said, "I don't know your pain, but I know what it feels like to not be able to breathe." Those words, they undid something inside me. I turned to him, expecting pity. But what I saw in his eyes wasn't sympathy, it was recognition. He became a part of my routine faster than I knew how to resist. He walked with me after therapy, waited outside during my group sessions, texted me things like, "Today doesn't define you," or "You're still here." That's brave. And then, one evening, when the sun was bleeding through the clouds, he whispered it. "I know you're shattered, but if you let me, I'll hold every piece." I should have run. I should have asked, why me? I should have noticed the warning signs behind that perfect, broken smile. But I didn't. Because broken people don't always crave healing. Sometimes, they crave recognition. And Archer made me feel seen. He started calling me his miracle. Told me I was the strongest soul he'd ever met. Promised he'd never let me break again. I believed him. God help me, I believed him. And so, when he moved in with me after 6 months, I welcomed him with open arms. When he started paying my bills so I could focus on healing, I cried in gratitude. And when he held me during my night terrors, whispering that I was safe now, I truly thought I was. But safety is sometimes just a story we tell ourselves. Right before the knife sinks in, they say love heals. But what no one tells you is, some loves infect you first. Archer was never loud about control. No yelling, no slammed doors, no bruises you could point to. He was gentle. The kind of gentle that disarms you before it destroys you. It started with small things. He didn't like me going to therapy alone anymore. He said it made him anxious, not knowing what I was talking about behind those closed doors. At first, it felt sweet. Like he cared. So I said okay. Next, it was my friends. The few I had left. He said they triggered me, reminded me of things I was trying to forget. He said their energy was too negative, that I deserved peace. And peace, he claimed, could only come from him. So I let them go. One by one, I erased every connection that wasn't him. Not because he asked me to directly, no. Because he made me feel like choosing anyone else was choosing pain over healing. And I wanted to heal. More than anything. Then came the finances. He insisted on taking over completely. "Less stress for you," he said. I handed over my bank card, feeling stupidly relieved. Like I was finally safe in someone's hands. Except they weren't hands. They were chains. 6 months in, my world had shrunk to the size of him. He was my morning, my night, my everything in between. And yet, something inside me had started to rot. He started logging into my phone. He knew every password. Sometimes he'd wake me up in the middle of the night to ask, "Why did you like this person's post? Who is this number?" I'd apologize. God, I always apologized. Even when I didn't know what I was apologizing for. Because somehow, everything became my fault. When I had panic attacks, he'd say, "I thought you were getting better. I'm doing everything for you." When I tried to talk about my emotions, he'd sigh and mutter, "You're too sensitive. Maybe that's why people leave you. He weaponized my past pain like a scalpel. Precise, cold, and forgiving. The man who once said he'd hold every broken piece had now started dropping them one by one. And every time I shattered, he'd ask me why I couldn't just stay whole. I remember looking in the mirror one night, bare-faced, eyes dull, heart numb, and I whispered, "This isn't love. This is a slow death." But I stayed, because I had nowhere else to go, because he had made sure of that, and because somewhere inside me, the little girl who just wanted to be loved, still thought maybe, just maybe, he meant it when he said he'd never let me break again. But the truth? He was already breaking me. Slowly, quietly, completely. The day I truly broke didn't come with violence. There was no storm, no slammed door, no loud betrayal. It came in the form of silence. A silence so cold, it made my bones ache. It was a Tuesday. I had spent the entire morning cleaning the apartment, cooking his favorite meal, folding his clothes just the way he liked them. Not because he asked me to, because I thought, maybe if I'm enough today, he won't look through me like I'm nothing. He came home that night with lipstick on his collar, a shade I'd never worn, a color I couldn't ignore. I froze. My mind screamed, "Don't ask. Don't accuse. Just pretend." But my heart had had enough. So I asked, quietly, carefully, almost apologetically, "Whose lipstick is that?" He stared at me, unblinking. And then he laughed. A cold, cruel laugh that didn't sound like Archer at all. "Don't be dramatic," he said, brushing past me. "You're always looking for reasons to feel broken." He didn't deny it. Didn't even try to lie. Because he didn't need to. He knew I wouldn't leave. He knew he had burned every bridge I could have used to escape. But something in me cracked that night. Not the kind of crack he could fix with pretty words or guilt-laced apologies. No. It was deeper. For the first time in months, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't try to be enough. I just went quiet. And in that silence, a scream began to build. Not one made of sound, but one made of rage, of grief, of clarity. He had hollowed me out and filled me with his own darkness. He had rewritten my identity, line by line, until all that remained was a puppet in his hands. But what he didn't realize was, even puppets snap when the strings are pulled too tight. That night, after he fell asleep, I sat in the living room in the dark, staring at nothing, breathing shallow, cold breaths. And I thought, he became my heir. And now, he's the reason I can't breathe without choking on pain. But then another voice whispered from somewhere deeper, "If he could break you quietly, then you can destroy him the same way." And that's when something shifted. I stopped asking why he hurt me. And I started wondering how I'd make him bleed without ever drawing a knife. I didn't leave that night. I didn't scream. I didn't confront him. No, I smiled. And that smile? It was the beginning of his end. You see, Archer thought he had broken me so completely that I'd never be able to function without him. What he didn't realize was, while he was busy feeding on my silence, I was learning to speak in a new language, revenge. For weeks, I played my role perfectly. The obedient partner. The fragile, grateful girl who clung to his every word. But behind the mask, I was studying him. Every habit. Every weakness. Every secret. And the first thing I noticed? He wasn't as smart as he thought he was. He used the same passcode for everything. Left his emails open when he got drunk. And worst of all, he underestimated me. I began with his phone. Copied every message. Every flirty photo. Every cruel thing he said about me to the other women he called just friends. Then, I opened a secret account. Started stashing money away. Bit by bit. Coin by coin. Every time I grocery shopped, I pocketed the change. Every time he transferred funds to cover my needs, I skimmed a little off the top. Until one day, I had enough to disappear. But I wasn't planning to just leave. No, I wanted him to watch himself fall. So I planted the seeds. I started recording audio clips, phone calls, screenshots of him mocking my mental health to his friends, him bragging about how easy it was to train a broken girl. I made sure those files were safe, stored them on cloud backups, flash drives, even a burner email he didn't know existed. Then came the next step, ruining his image. Archer had carefully crafted a persona, the doting boyfriend, the supportive partner, the good man who saved a damaged girl. And I knew exactly who believed that version of him. His colleagues, his clients, his family. So I reached out, anonymously, one by one. I sent little pieces of the truth. Not enough to expose everything at once. Just enough to make them question him. Enough to plant doubt. And oh, how he started to unravel. He'd pace the apartment, snapping at every small thing. Complain about how people at work were treating him differently. Start drinking more. Sleeping less. He couldn't figure out what was happening. Why his perfect life was cracking at the edges. And all the while, I just smiled. Cooked his meals. Kissed his cheek. Slept beside him like nothing had changed. Because that was the real revenge. Making him feel safe. While I quietly set his world on fire. They say karma comes slowly. But mine? I delivered it by hand. Carefully. Intimately. With the same silence he once used to destroy me. By now, Archer's cracks had deepened. He was slipping at work. Paranoid at home. He'd ask if I was hiding something, if I was talking to someone, if I was okay. And I'd just smile, the same way he used to when I begged him to care. But the final blow? It needed precision. He had always been proud of his position, a respected executive at a firm that valued reputation above all else. So I used that. The files I had collected, the emotional abuse, the messages, the recordings, I bundled them into a neat little package. No signature. Just truth. Sent directly to the firm's HR. And to the board. And then, I waited. 3 days later, I came home to find him staring blankly at the wall. His suit jacket wrinkled. His tie loosened. Hands shaking. They suspended me. His voice was barely a whisper. They're investigating everything. Someone sent them. Things. I tilted my head, feigning confusion. That's terrible, I said softly, pouring his tea. Who would do something like that? He stared at me, searching. But I had become too good at playing his game. In the days that followed, the spiral accelerated. His firm cut ties. Friends stopped returning calls. His parents, oh, the proud parents who once told me I was lucky to have him, started asking questions he couldn't answer. He tried to lean on me then. Suddenly, he was affectionate again. Suddenly, I was his world again. But it was too late. The man who once fed off my weakness was now drowning in his own. And I wasn't going to save him. Because what he didn't know was, while his world was collapsing, mine had just begun to bloom. I had found myself again. In every whisper I'd once silenced. In every step I took without asking his permission. In every corner of myself he tried to erase. And now, I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. Because I had become it. The morning I left, the sun was rising, but inside, it felt like a sunset. A final goodbye to the girl who once begged him to love her. And a quiet hello to the woman who no longer needed him to breathe. I packed in silence. No tears. No hesitation. Every item I took was chosen with care. My documents. My memories. My proof of who I used to be. And who I had become. He was asleep on the couch. Unshaven. Broken in all the ways he once broke me. I stood there for a moment. Watching him. Not with hate. Not with anger. But with the calm detachment of someone who had survived a storm so violent, it had once made her forget her own name. He mumbled something in his sleep. My name. followed by the word sorry. But apologies don't rebuild what you destroyed on purpose. And guilt doesn't restore air to lungs that learn to live on empty. So I left. No note. No drama. No goodbye. Just the quiet click of the door closing behind me. A door I knew I'd never walk through again. Outside, the world felt different. Not because it had changed, but because I had. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking with fear trailing behind me. I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for his moods to shift like weather. I wasn't afraid of being alone, because I finally realized being alone is peace. Being with him was war. I moved into a small apartment across the city. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't perfect. But it was mine. Every corner held freedom. Every breath came easier. And every time I looked in the mirror, I saw a stranger slowly turning into someone I could learn to love again. He tried to contact me, of course. Texts, calls, emails, voicemails full of apologies, promises, tears. But I didn't respond. Because his voice no longer carried power. His words no longer reached the parts of me that once bled for him. He had become a ghost. And I had become the silence that buried him. It didn't take long. The silence drove him mad. He couldn't handle being ignored, being unseen, the same way I had felt every single day I spent wrapped in his false warmth. So he showed up. One evening, just as I was returning from work, I found him outside my new place. Disheveled. Desperate. Eyes hollow with the weight of the life he had lost. "Please," he whispered. "Just talk to me." He dropped to his knees like a scene from a bad movie. The kind where the villain suddenly wants to be redeemed once the credits roll. But this wasn't a movie. And he wasn't getting a second act. "You look tired," I said, cold and calm. "Guilt weighs more than pain, doesn't it?" He tried to reach for my hand. I stepped back. "I lost everything," he said. "My job, my friends, my family. I have nothing left." And for a moment, just a moment, I could see the man he might have been. Had he chosen to love instead of manipulate? Had he chosen to build instead of break? But remorse born from consequence isn't the same as real regret. So I leaned closer and whispered something I knew would stay with him forever. "I was ready to die for you. You taught me how to live without you. Now live without me." He broke. Right there on the sidewalk. Crying, pleading, shaking like a child who lost his favorite toy. But I didn't flinch. I handed him a sealed envelope. Inside were copies of every file I had. Proof of what he did. Receipts of who he really was. "Just in case you ever try to rewrite the story," I said. "This is the truth. And I'm not afraid of it anymore." Then I turned around. Walked into my building. And didn't look back. Not once. Because the man who once made me forget how to breathe was now choking on the truth he tried to bury. And I had never stood taller. They say every story has a villain, a hero, and a victim. What they don't tell you is that sometimes you're all three. Sometimes you begin as the broken girl who begged for love, turn into the warrior who learns to survive, and end as the ghost someone else can never outrun. Archer never recovered. He tried to rebuild, to rebrand. But his past followed him like a shadow stitched to his soul. The industry he once ruled closed its doors. His friends turned their backs. His family, ashamed, disgusted, calling it a phase he should have hidden better. They didn't care what he did, only that the world had found out. Meanwhile, I thrived in silence. I didn't need to post about healing. Didn't need to prove my growth to the world. Because growth is quiet. And revenge. Revenge is best served in moments they never see coming. One day, months later, I received an email. An anonymous invitation to a conference. A speaking panel on emotional resilience. Someone had read a short piece I'd written, anonymously, about survival, about reclaiming power. They wanted me to speak. Me, not as a victim, but as a voice. I stared at that email for hours. Because for so long, my voice had belonged to him. Every word, every thought, every feeling, filtered through the fear of how he would react. And now the world wanted to hear me. The night before the event, I got another message. From him. No words. Just a picture of the two of us. Taken years ago. Smiling. Back when I thought love was supposed to hurt. It didn't shake me. It didn't make me cry. It made me laugh. Because he was clinging to a version of me that no longer existed. The girl in that picture was gone. In her place stood a woman who had been shattered, but chose to build herself with sharper edges. At the conference, I stood on stage in front of a crowd of strangers, each person holding their own kind of heartbreak. I didn't give them a lecture. I didn't pretend to be healed or perfect. I just told the truth. He found me shattered and promised I'd never break again. I began. But then, he became the reason I forgot how to breathe without pain. The room was silent, heavy, holding every word like it was their own. I spoke of the manipulation, the quiet control, the suffocation that came dressed as love. Of how gaslighting doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it whispers until your own voice disappears. And then I told them how I came back. Not all at once. Not without scars. But piece by piece. Day by day. Until one morning, I looked in the mirror and didn't see a victim. I saw a survivor. And then, a storm. After my talk, people lined up to thank me. Some cried. Some simply nodded, unable to find the words. And that's when I knew my story wasn't just mine. It was ours. Months passed. I kept writing, kept healing. My work reached people I'd never meet. Strangers messaged me from across the world, saying, I thought I was the only one. I wasn't famous. I wasn't rich. But I was finally free. And then, one morning, I saw him. Archer. Sitting alone outside a cafe. A shell of the man he once was. Hair unkempt, eyes vacant, clothes wrinkled. He didn't see me at first. But when he did, he froze. As if time stopped. As if guilt had just remembered how to breathe. I didn't approach him. Didn't yell, didn't cry, didn't ask why. Instead, I simply looked at him. And in that one look, I let him see everything. The pain he caused. The fire I walked through. The ashes I rose from. And most importantly, the peace he would never know again. He stood up. Took a hesitant step toward me. His lips parted, maybe to apologize, maybe to beg again. But I shook my head. You don't get to speak in the ending you tried to write for me, I said softly. This isn't your story anymore. And I turned away. He didn't follow. Because this time, he knew. He was the ghost now. Haunting a life he no longer had access to. Sometimes, people ask me, do you forgive him? And I say this. Forgiveness is not about letting someone back in. It's about letting yourself walk out, without the weight they left behind. I don't hate him. I pity him. Because he will spend the rest of his life searching for someone to love him the way I did. And no one ever will. Because the kind of love I gave, it was rare, raw, real. And he didn't just lose me. He destroyed the only version of himself that someone could have ever truly loved. So no, I don't forgive him. I outgrew him. And when I finally closed the book he tried to write my ending in, I picked up the pen and wrote the final line myself. But then, I became the ending he never wanted to read. And this time, I didn't bleed ink. I wrote it in fire.